You know, when we think about trust in the physical world, it's almost entirely based on things we can touch, right? Things we can actually see with our own eyes.
Right. Yeah. Tangible things.
Exactly. Like you lock your front door at night, you hear that heavy metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into the frame, and you just feel secure in your home. Or, you've signed a paper contract with a blue ink pen. You physically hand it across a wooden table to another human being, and you know a binding deal has been struck.
Yeah, we have literally centuries of human intuition built around that kind of physical security and physical identity. You could weigh it in your hands.
Right.
I mean, a forged signature on paper requires a physical act of deception, right? It leaves physical traces, you know, indentations on the paper, the chemical composition of the ink. It's a tangible reality.
But then suddenly you can't hear the lock click
Yeah.
anymore. You take all of your identity, your signature, your ability to prove to a bank or a government that you are actually you, and you digitize it.
Right into the cloud.
Exactly. You put it into the cloud. You're relying entirely on invisible math, on lines of code, and most importantly, on the institutions that hold those digital keys. And when that invisible lock gets picked, or even if someone just claims they picked it, the entire illusion of security can just evaporate overnight.
Terrifying, honestly.
It really is. And so for you listening right now, welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and we are looking at a rapidly unfolding situation down in Uruguay.
Yeah, and it is moving at absolute breakneck speed across the cybersecurity landscape right now.
Hmm.
And the implications, they extend far beyond just one country's borders because the underlying technology they use is universal.
Right. So our mission today for this deep dive is to analyze the alleged massive compromise of Uruguay's national digital identity platform, which is called TuID.
TuID.
Yeah, TuID. This is a system that was designed, engineered, and promoted at the highest levels to be practically
A
impenetrable.
literal digital fortress.
A fortress, exactly. But we aren't just going to read through dry technical server logs today. We're examining this crisis through a very specific, unique analytical lens. We're using the perspective of Alberto Daniel Hill, a renowned cybersecurity expert and a really fierce advocate for radical transparency and threat intelligence.
Anna Hill is a fascinating figure to guide us through this. His personal and professional history makes his analytical framework incredibly potent for an incident of this magnitude.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to be clear to you, the listener, before we dive into this. We're not taking a political stance here regarding the state telecommunications company Antel or the Uruguayan government.
Right, that's important to state.
Yeah, our objective is strictly to impartially report on the severe claims presented by the threat actors and then analyze those claims through Hill's established framework regarding institutional secrecy.
We're looking at the data and the systemic response.
Exactly. And we have a really deep stack of sources to work through today. We've got the official, highly detailed technical architecture documents for the TuID platform itself. We also have breaking threat intelligence reports and underground forum screenshots detailing what's being called the LaPampaLeaks claim.
That's the threat actor group.
Right. And finally, we have a really comprehensive media kit and forensic dossier on Alberto Hill himself. So, okay, let's unpack this, because this isn't just a story about code or servers or hackers trading files on the dark web.
No, not at all.
Fundamentally, this is a story about the incredibly fragile trust that exists between everyday citizens and the massive institutions that hold their digital lives in their hands.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is the stark, almost jarring contrast at the heart of this event. On one side, you have this highly secure, beautifully architected cryptographic infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
On paper, it is a fortress.
Right, the perfect theory.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have the messy human reality of systemic vulnerabilities, operational oversights, and, well, what we might call institutional mutism when things allegedly go horribly wrong.
Yeah, let's start with that perfect theory. Because before we can really understand the severity of this alleged breach and the absolute panic it is causing across South American technical forums right now, you really need to understand what TuID actually is.
Yeah, we aren't talking about a simple password manager for your streaming services here.
No, not at all. TuID stands for Tu Identidad Digital, or Your Digital Identity. It's the official cloud-based digital identity platform in Uruguay. It's operated by Antel, which is the state-owned telecommunications company.
And looking at the architecture documents, I mean, it's incredibly powerful.
It really is. It's an accredited trust service provider, or PSCO, authorized by Uruguay's Electronic Certification Unit, the UCE, and a GISIC, the National E-Government Agency.
And the legal framework is what elevates this from, like, a neat tech project to critical national infrastructure, right? Oh, absolutely. Under Uruguayan law specifically, Lei 18.600 TuID provides advanced electronic signatures. And the crucial detail for the listener to grasp here is that this digital signature carries the exact same legal weight as a handwritten signature certified by a physical notary public.
See, that is just massive to me.
It's huge.
If you sign a document using the highest tier of TuID, legally speaking, the courts assume it was unequivocally you. You cannot easily repudiate it later and say, oh, my account was hacked, I didn't sign that.
Right. The burden of proof is entirely on you at that point.
Because it's used for government procedures, signing binding legal contracts, banking, accessing health services.
Yeah.
To prevent the nightmare scenario of someone stealing that capability, Antel built progressive tiers of security. I want to break these down, actually, because they show how seriously the system was designed.
Yeah, they structured it in 3 progressive levels.
Right. The first one is the basic level. This is a remote online registration. You basically just set up a username and a strong password. Pretty standard.
Very standard. But then you have the intermediate level. This requires a verified identity, and it introduces two-factor authentication, or 2FA. So you need your password, plus a one-time passcode sent via SMS or email.
Right, and those first 2 tiers represent standard commercial security. You see that on, like, a Gmail account.
Yeah.
But the advanced or very high level is where the heavy machinery comes in.
Oh yeah, this is the notary level.
Yeah.
To operate at this tier, to execute those legally binding digital signatures, you need a cryptographic digital certificate, a specific signature PIN, and biometrics.
And the biometrics aren't just, a simple selfie you take in your bathroom. The fingerprint data is actually registered in person and cross-checked against the Direction National Identification the National Civil Registry.
Or alternatively, users can use facial recognition through the TuID mobile app, which our sources note includes liveness detection.
Wait, liveness detection? Explain how that works, because that sounds intense.
Liveness detection is a fascinating layer of defense, actually. It requires the user to perform randomized micro-movements, like blinking, smiling, turning their head, while the camera maps depth and infrared reflections.
Oh, wow. So it's actively checking if you're alive.
Exactly. It ensures the system is looking at a living, breathing human being, effectively neutralizing attacks, where someone simply holds a high-resolution photograph or a tablet, playing a video up to the camera.
That's incredibly smart. And the cryptography holding all this together is where the system resembles a digital Fort Knox.
Yeah, the hardware backend.
Right. The system relies on hardware security modules, or HSMs. Specifically, the documents show they use Entrust Enshield HSMs, which carry a FIPS 142 Level 3 certification.
Which is a huge deal in the security world.
Yeah, for the listener, FIPS stands for Federal Information Processing Standards. It's a U.S. government computer security standard used to approve cryptographic modules. Level 3 means it's not just software encryption. It involves physical, hardware-level tamper resistance.
Think of the HSM as a highly secure, tamper-resistant black box sitting in a server rack somewhere in a data center. When you generate your digital private key, the cryptographic core that proves you are you, it is generated entirely inside this box.
And it never leaves the box, right?
Never. By fundamental design, it can never leave. The key is born in the HSM, it lives its entire life cycle in the HSM, and it performs all its cryptographic signing operations inside the HSM.
I was actually reading about how these specific level 3 boxes operate, and the physical engineering is just incredible. If a threat actor somehow gained physical access to the Antel data center and tried to, pry the box open or drill into it or even use chemicals to dissolve the casing.
The HSM detects the intrusion immediately.
Exactly. It monitors temperature changes, voltage fluctuations, and physical pressure. The moment it detects tampering, it initiates instantaneous zeroization.
Basically a self-destruct sequence.
Right. It completely wipes and destroys the SRAM memory containing all the private keys in a fraction of a second. It effectively commits digital suicide rather than surrender the keys to an attacker.
And that physical security is paired with rigorous data handling for the biometrics, too. When the TuID app scans your face or your fingerprint, it does not save a JPEG image.
Okay, so what does it save?
It translates the spatial relationships of your physical features into an irreversible mathematical vector.
An irreversible vector, so it's just a string of numbers.
Basically, yeah. Even if someone stole the database containing those vectors, they could never reverse engineer the math to recreate a picture of your face or reconstruct your physical fingerprint. It is a one-way cryptographic street.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand this fully. We have FIPS Level 3 hardware boxes that literally nuke themselves if you touch them.
Yes.
We have private keys that never see the light of day. We have irreversible biometric math and liveness detection stopping any kind of spoofing. On paper, this sounds utterly bulletproof. It sounds totally impenetrable.
It really does.
So I have to push back here. If the cryptography is virtually unbreakable and the physical hardware is wrapped in tamper sensors, how are we sitting here on May 7th looking at a potential national crisis? How did a breach even happen?
Well, you're hitting on the core vulnerability of complex systems. The most common fallacy in cybersecurity is believing that strong cryptography equals total system security.
Right.
You can build a vault with 10-foot-thick steel doors, biometric scanners, and laser grids. But none of that matters if a structural flaw allows someone to bypass the vault entirely.
Like leaving a window open.
Exactly. The vulnerability rarely lies in the encryption algorithm itself. It lies in how the surrounding applications communicate with that encryption. And according to the claims breaking over the last 48 hours, that operational layer is exactly where the failure occurred.
Wow. So the real terror of this situation isn't that the encryption was broken, it's that the system's own architecture was allegedly used against it. So sometime between yesterday, May 6th, and today, May 7th, a threat actor known as LaPampaLeaks surfaced on dark web forums. And they took responsibility for what they claim is a massive systemic compromise of the TuID platform.
And their claims are very specific.
Yeah, they claim to have exfiltrated 8 gigabytes of internal files from Antel's servers, along with the highly sensitive data of, quote, hundreds of citizens.
And it's the specificity of their claims that has the threat intelligence community on extremely high alert right now. They aren't making vague boasts. They're providing structural evidence of their access.
And going back to how they bypassed those self-destructing hardware boxes, they didn't even try to break the encryption. Like you said, that would take a supercomputer millennia.
Right, it's virtually impossible.
Instead, our threat intel reports indicate they allegedly found exposed API credentials stored alongside internal backend files on Antel servers.
Yeah, API credentials.
I want to explain this using an analogy because the mechanics here are super crucial for the listener to understand. Imagine the HSM, that ultra-secure black box, is a highly guarded, secure printer in a locked room.
Okay, I like this analogy.
An API key is the digital ID badge you swipe to get into that room, and a DTO, a data transfer object, is the actual PDF file you want to print.
That analogy actually maps perfectly to the technical reality. An API, or application programming interface, is how the web portal tells the secure backend, hey, user X wants to sign this document.
Right.
To execute that, the portal needs an API key to prove it has the authority to issue the command.
So if a threat actor finds those API keys just left unsecured in the backend files, they don't need to break into the secure printer itself. They just steal the ID badge, walk into the room, and use the DTOs to hand the printer whatever document they want.
And the system complies because the ID badge is valid. It trusts the key, not the person holding it.
That is wild.
And by compromising that application layer, the scope of the data the actor claims to have accessed is just terrifying. The threat intel sources list national ID numbers, the sigilla de identidad. They list full names, dates of birth, home addresses, email addresses, and phone numbers.
But it goes far deeper than standard personal information, right?
Much deeper.
Because the threat actor provided data samples showing they had visibility into the internal validation flags of the TuID system itself. They could see if a user's biometrics had been validated by the state, if their communication channels were verified, and their exact progressive security level.
Yeah, and the absolute worst-case scenario, they claim to have exported those signature DTOs alongside the TuID API keys.
Wait, the signature DTOs? So they can sign things?
If an attacker possesses both the API keys and the signature data transfer objects, they possess the exact architectural components needed to spoof the signing process. They haven't extracted the private keys as we established. The hardware prevents that. But they control the interface that commands the hardware. They could theoretically authorize transactions, sign binding contracts, or alter identity parameters on behalf of legitimate users.
So they basically become a ghost in the machine, operating with the full legal authority of a notarized citizen.
Exactly.
And the LaPampaLeaks actor isn't just quietly selling this capability to the highest bidder on the dark web. They are being incredibly brazen about it.
Very loud, very public.
Yeah, one of the sources in our stack includes screenshots from the dark web forums showing a visual collage, a dashboard of sorts filled with targeted Uruguayan public figures. The actor combined pixelated photos of these individuals with panels of their exposed API data.
And the construction of that visual evidence is highly calculated. It is designed for maximum institutional embarrassment.
It really is.
Yeah.
The captions they added are mocking and highly specific. They targeted an abogada que colabora con la policía, which translates to a lawyer collaborating with police cybercrime divisions. They targeted an ex-director of security in AGSIC, the agency responsible for e-government. They went after journalists, including a tech writer from El Observador and Eduardo Prive, describing him as a professional leaker of cases in the prosecutor's office. They even included senators and the general director of technological support and cybercrime.
When you analyze a target list like that, you have to look at the motive. This is not the behavior of a standard ransomware syndicate looking for a quiet, lucrative cryptocurrency payout.
No, because a financially motivated attacker just encrypts the database and negotiates in secret. You don't build a custom dashboard humiliating the director of police cybercrime if your goal is just to extract money.
Precisely. This suggests a motive rooted in asymmetric cyber warfare. The goal is disruptive. They are actively targeting the exact individuals responsible for securing the nation's digital infrastructure, the people investigating cybercrimes, and the journalists reporting on them.
It's a massive flex of power.
It is a massive flex. They are signaling, we have breached your most secure sovereign system. We are looking directly at the people whose job it is to stop us, and you are entirely powerless to prevent it.
Which brings us to the most critical juncture of this deep dive. The real terror of these API keys isn't just that they were found, it's the realization of how the institutions respond when they are caught leaving the keys on the table.
Yeah, the fallout.
Right. To understand why a state would potentially choose silence over security in the face of such a massive breach, we have to introduce our guide for this analysis. Looking through his forensic dossier, Alberto Daniel Hill is positioned globally as the digital knight.
The digital knight. He represents a very rare hybrid in the cybersecurity space.
Yeah.
You typically have underground threat actors on one side, right? And then highly sanitized corporate or government public relations departments on the other.
Right. Two extremes.
Hill bridges that gap with incredible technical depth and radical transparency.
And his background is intense. We are talking about someone with over 2 decades of experience in the deepest trenches of cybersecurity. He holds a master's degree in digital currencies from the University of Nicosia. Crucially, he is a former computer forensic examiner for Interpol and the Supreme Court of Justice in Uruguay.
So he's not just a guy with a blog.
Not at all. He has been the person executing the digital autopsies for the highest law enforcement agencies in the country.
He possesses an intimate structural understanding of how these state systems are built, and more importantly, how the institutions react when those systems fail.
But his expertise wasn't just forged in university lecture halls or government offices. It was forged in a crucible that is, frankly, difficult to comprehend. To understand the urgency with which he analyzes the TuID breach today in 2026, we have to look back at his origin story from 2014 and 2015.
Yeah, it is a harrowing case study of what happens when ethical technical intentions collide with a state apparatus desperate for self-preservation.
Back in 2014, Hill was operating as an ethical hacker. During his research, he uncovered a catastrophic vulnerability in a major medical provider's system.
And it was a shockingly simple vulnerability.
Right. Through simple URL manipulation, just changing numbers in the web address bar, he found that over 200,000 highly sensitive medical patient records were left completely exposed to the open internet. Anyone could have accessed them.
No hacking tools required, just a web browser.
Yeah. So he followed the established ethical protocol, responsible disclosure. He went to the provider, pointed out the massive hole in their architecture, and essentially said, hey, you need to patch this before a malicious actor finds it.
And in a mature digital ecosystem, responsible disclosure is the lifeblood of security. Companies offer bug bounties, they issue letters of commendation, they recognize that the researcher just saved them from a devastating regulatory fine and a public relations disaster.
But the Uruguayan system, at least at that time, lacked the technical nuance to differentiate between a white hat disclosure and a malicious attack.
Right.
Instead of gratitude, Hill faced severe institutional retaliation. The provider, deeply embarrassed by their own negligence, framed him as the attacker. The state apparatus came down on him with full force. And in 2017, Alberto Hill became the first person in Uruguay to be wrongfully imprisoned for a cybercrime.
It's just unbelievable.
He served roughly 8 months in a maximum security prison.
Just let the weight of that sink in for a second. He attempted to protect the sensitive medical data of 200,000 citizens, and the reward for his ethics was the complete loss of his freedom, placed in an incredibly dangerous physical environment.
It is horrifying. Most people, honestly, myself included, would have emerged from that experience completely broken. I would have walked away from keyboards entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
But the dossier uses this psychological term, post-traumatic growth, to describe what happened next.
Right, post-traumatic growth. It's the phenomenon where an individual experiences positive psychological change as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. Instead of succumbing to cynicism, Hill weaponized that profound grievance into a global mission.
He really did. He documented his descent into the judicial system and exposed its failure to understand the cyber realm in his acclaimed book, Log Into Hell. He took his story to the global stage, becoming the subject of episode 25 of the massive Darknet Diaries podcast.
It was a huge platform.
Yeah. He became a leading global advocate for the #HackNotCrime movement, fighting for the legal protection of ethical researchers around the world.
And he didn't just write books and go on podcasts. He built actual infrastructure. He took his mission to X, formerly Twitter, operating with the dossier terms live forensic validation hubs through X Spaces.
Yeah, the sources refer to him as a psychological CERT, a computer emergency response team, but for the human mind.
That's a great term for it.
The cybersecurity industry is defined by high-stress, high-stakes environments. When a breach happens, the immediate institutional instinct is often to find a scapegoat. Through his X Spaces, Hill creates a safe harbor for IT professionals facing ethical dilemmas.
People who see vulnerabilities but are terrified of speaking out because they know exactly what happened to him in 2017.
Exactly. He provides them with technical validation and emotional reciprocity.
He tells them, you are not crazy, the architecture is broken, and we are going to shine a light on it using empirical data.
Now, I do have to pause here and play devil's advocate for the listener for a second. We are leaning heavily on Hill's real-time analysis of this TuID breach. But given the trauma he endured, the wrongful imprisonment by the Uruguayan justice system, doesn't that make him inherently biased?
That's a very fair question to ask.
Is it possible he just has a massive axe to grind against the state and is eager to amplify any bad news about their infrastructure?
It is a critical question for threat intelligence analysis. You must always account for potential bias in your sources. However, the industry relies on empirical data, and Hill's data over the last several years completely insulates him from that critique. The industry does not view him as a bitter outcast. They view him as a hyper-accurate oracle.
The media kit specifically highlights his, quote, zero-error track record.
Correct. Tracking high-visibility Latin American threat intelligence flashes, Hill has maintained a 90 to 100% predictive accuracy rate.
That's incredibly high.
It is. He monitors the noise in underground forums. He forensically validates the chatter using the skills he honed at Interpol. And he publicly forecasts the event before the institutions even admit a compromise has occurred.
Right. He predicted the massive ransomware attack on the Mortgage Bank of Uruguay, didn't he?
He did. He isn't throwing stones based on historical grievance. He is pointing to hard forensic reality that the institutions are actively trying to sweep under the rug.
Which brings us to the analytical framework he developed, the lens through which we have to view the TuID crisis today, the secretism index. This is where Hill takes cybersecurity out of the realm of just firewalls and API keys and turns it into a barometer for democratic health.
It is a brilliant macro analysis tool. The secretism index measures the level of transparency a country's institutions exhibit when their digital infrastructure is compromised. It recognizes that transparency isn't just a PR strategy. It is a fundamental technical requirement for mitigating cyber threats.
I was looking at the global numbers on this index, and the disparities are striking. The United States sits somewhere in the middle at a 5.2. They have progressive disclosure policies, but they still suffer from gross negligence regarding legacy systems.
Yeah, a lot of old tech over there.
But then Latvia is rated low on the index. Why? Because they are bound by strict GDPR mandates that legally require the reporting of a breach within 72 hours. In Latvia, institutional silence is literally a crime.
But then you analyze South America through Hill's index.
It's bleak. Argentina sits at an 8.8, characterized by institutional muteness, a deeply ingrained habit of government officials dismissing massive data leaks as nothing more than old public data.
We hear that excuse all the time.
Yeah, and Uruguay, the focus of our deep dive today, ranks an alarming 9.7 out of 10. Hill characterizes this score as reputation shielding, where the state apparatus systematically prioritizes its own institutional image over the immediate safety of its citizens.
To understand the mechanical danger of a 9.7 on the secretism index, we have to look at the vicious cycle Hill identifies, which he calls the protocol of silence.
Protocol of silence.
That's right. This isn't just a theory. It is a predictable four-step downward spiral that plays out almost every time state infrastructure is breached in these highly secretive environments.
Let's break those 4 steps down, actually, because they map eerily well onto the unfolding events with TuID. Step 1 is the inciting incident.
The cyber breach?
The initial attack. Right. The threat actors exploit a structural vulnerability, like the exposed API keys and DTOs we discussed, and they successfully exfiltrate the data. The invisible lock is picked.
Step 2 is where the human element fails catastrophically. Narrative minimization.
This is the PR spin, right?
Exactly. Instead of immediately coming forward, admitting the breach, and instructing citizens on how to protect themselves, the institution goes into extreme damage control. They issue incredibly vague statements. They might falsely label the massive data exfiltration as a technical glitch, a scheduled maintenance issue, or rely on the classic excuse that the hackers simply scraped old, publicly available data. They actively attempt to shrink the public narrative of the crisis.
Which triggers step 3, legal paralysis. This is the bureaucratic fallout. Because the institution refuses to formally and technically disclose the severity of the breach, regulatory oversight is completely blocked.
You can't regulate a secret.
Exactly. Data protection agencies and parliamentary oversight committees are left just sitting on their hands. You cannot investigate a crime that the victim, in this case, the state institution, refuses to admit even happened.
And finally, step 4, which is arguably the most technically dangerous phase, information siloing.
Information siloing. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Because the institution is hiding the true nature of the breach, they're simultaneously hoarding the indicators of compromise, or IOCs. They refuse to share the specific IP addresses, the malware signatures, the specific API vulnerabilities, or the attack vectors with other government agencies or the private sector.
Oh, wow.
By siloing that critical threat intelligence just to save face, they virtually guarantee that the exact same threat actor can simply pivot and replicate the exact same attack on another target within the country, using the exact same methods.
So the citizens are left utterly defenseless, the security gap widens, and it's all done just to protect the pristine reputation of a government logo.
Precisely.
And to prove that this framework is a real present danger, the sources point to a massive precedent that occurred just a couple of months ago in March of 2026. The Cronus breach in Argentina. This is a textbook execution of the protocol of silence.
The timeline of the Cronus breach is astounding, and it solidifies exactly why Hill's predictive methodology is unmatched in the region.
Let's walk through that timeline because it's wild. On March 19, 2026, Hill is actively monitoring the Mexican cyber underground. He intercepts specific threat chatter and issues a threat intel flash. He publicly predicts on X that a massive coordinated data exfiltration attack is going to hit the Argentine government before the end of the month.
He stakes his entire professional reputation on it.
Yeah, 11 days before the catastrophe strikes.
And 11 days is an absolute eternity in cybersecurity. It is ample time for a proactive government to lock down endpoints, rotate credentials, and prepare incident response teams.
But because Argentina sits at an 8.8 on the secretism index, they do nothing.
Nothing at all.
Then, on March 30th, exactly as Hill predicted, the threat group known as the Cronus Mafia dumps over 8 million records. The breach hits 28 different Argentine government agencies, crippling the central bank and the Ministry of Health. It is a devastating systemic blow to the nation's infrastructure.
And how did the Argentine government respond to the exposure of 8 million of their citizens?
Narrative minimization.
Worse, they executed the protocol of silence flawlessly. Official channels remained completely mute. They offered no guidance, no technical explanation, and no support to the people whose lives had just been laid bare on the dark web.
But Alberto Hill didn't stay silent. Within 5 to 10 minutes of the data dump going live, Hill launched an X-Space. He performed a live public forensic autopsy of the breached data.
real-time analysis.
Yeah, he analyzed the structural failures, proving in real time that the government systems lacked basic two-factor authentication, and he mapped out exactly how the attackers achieved a full systemic breach in under 10 minutes.
The Cronus breach perfectly illustrates the sheer danger of institutional mutism. While the state paralyzed itself with public relations concerns, Hill's broadcast became the sole public lifeline for accurate, actionable incident data. He became the primary source of truth, stepping in because the institutions fundamentally abdicated their responsibility to protect and inform their citizens.
Which brings us crashing back to today, May 7th, 2026, the TuID crisis. We are watching this exact same cycle try to play out in real time in Uruguay, a country with a 9.7 on the secretism index.
It's happening all over again.
LaPampaLeaks has dumped the evidence. They have paraded the persons of interest dashboard on the dark web, mocking the cybercrime divisions. And on social media platforms right now, the public alarm is just deafening.
The sentiment analysis included in the source documents paints a picture of a populace that is angry, panicked, and deeply cynical. They are openly calling the state digital systems nefasto, terrible, disastrous.
And the timing of this alleged breach couldn't possibly be worse for the government because they have been aggressively pushing for the adoption of a new national digital wallet system.
Oh, that's right, the digital wallet.
Citizens are looking at the TuID crisis and asking the obvious question. If you cannot secure the API keys that control my legal signature, why on earth would I trust you with my life savings in a state-run digital wallet? Why would I trust the integrity of an electronic election?
It's a completely valid question. Meanwhile, the unofficial rumors swirling through the technical community suggest that Antel is dusting off the exact playbook Hill describes in step 2 of his cycle.
Narrative minimization again.
Exactly. They are allegedly whispering to journalists that the exposed data is just old and informally denying that any active breach of the core system has occurred, all while failing to produce a comprehensive, technically transparent rebuttal.
This is where Hill steps directly into the real-time debate. Our sources capture an interaction on X between Hill and a highly respected cybersecurity firm called Core Recon. Hill issued a very stark technical warning about the path Antel is taking.
What did he say?
I'm going to quote him directly here. If they are actually denying any data breach, they are not revoking those compromise certificates. So it's a huge gamble if they're playing with the protocol of secretism.
Wow. That statement cuts to the absolute mechanical core of the crisis. It highlights the devastating cost of inaction. In a high-trust digital identity system like TuID, the default security posture cannot be to wait and see. It must be, as Core Recon stated in the exchange, revoke fast, investigate deeply.
Let's break down why that is so critical, because this is where the theoretical cryptography collides with real-world damage. If LaPampaLeaks truly exposed the API keys and the data transfer objects associated with the signature system, those digital certificates are tainted, period.
They're radioactive.
Exactly. They must be considered compromised and weaponized until forensic logs prove otherwise.
Exactly. I'll frame it this way. If you lose your physical passport while traveling abroad, you don't wait a few weeks to see if someone uses it to cross a border before you report it. You cancel it immediately. You revoke its authority. In the digital realm, that process involves adding the compromised certificates to a certificate revocation list, or CRL. If a hacker attempts to use a revoked certificate to digitally sign a contract, the receiving system checks the CRL, sees the certificate is invalid, and rejects the transaction entirely.
And this is the massive gamble Hill is talking about. If the government refuses to officially admit there was a breach because they are desperately trying to protect their institutional reputation, they won't revoke the certificates.
Right, because issuing a mass revocation of thousands of TuID certificates is a blaring neon sign admitting that the system was fundamentally hacked.
And by choosing to save face, they are leaving the vault door wide open with the keys sitting right on the table. We established earlier that a TuID advanced signature carries the exact legal weight of a notarized physical document.
Right, it's binding.
If those digital signatures remain active and unrevoked in the hands of a malicious threat actor, the cost of forged identities spreading through the national ecosystem is basically incalculable.
It would be catastrophic for the economy and the legal system.
I want to break the fourth wall here for a second and talk directly to you, the listener. If you are listening to this right now and thinking, well, my bank uses two-factor authentication, so I'm safe even if my password leaks, think again.
Yeah, 2FA won't save you here.
The terror of this specific API exposure is that it bypasses the 2FA entirely. The threat actor isn't logging into the front end of the website where the SMS code is requested. They're using the API key to talk directly to the backend servers, skipping the login screen entirely.
They go straight to the vault.
You could have threat actors signing binding legal contracts, transferring property deeds, or authorizing massive financial transactions, and legally the government's own system would testify in court that you did it.
That is the terrifying reality of the protocol of secretism. When an institution treats public disclosure and radical transparency as a threat to its reputation, rather than a fundamental duty to its citizens, it erodes the very foundation of digital sovereignty.
We have gone on an incredible journey today. We started by looking at the sheer theoretical perfection of the TuID architecture. We explored the FIPS 142 Level 3 hardware security modules, the temperature sensors and instantaneous zeroization, the irreversible mathematical vectors for biometrics, and the advanced electronic signatures that rival physical notaries.
It was designed to be a true digital fortress.
And then we watched that theoretical fortress collide with the messy operational reality of the internet. Exposed API keys acting as digital master keys left unsecured on backend servers. A threat actor gleefully mocking the very authorities tasked with stopping them, orchestrating a campaign of asymmetric cyber warfare.
In guiding us through that technical wreckage was Alberto Daniel Hill, a man who experienced the absolute worst of institutional retaliation, wrongful imprisonment for doing the ethical thing, and emerged not broken, but hyper-focused on protecting others.
He showed us through the TuID Breach in Argentina and his secretism index that the real systemic danger isn't just the hacker exploiting the code, it's the protocol of silence.
It's the cover-up.
It's the moment an institution decides that preserving its reputation is more valuable than securing your identity.
His analysis serves as a warning light, flashing red for the entire globe. When governments choose narrative minimization and legal paralysis over radical transparency, they leave their citizens utterly defenseless against the next attack, and they destroy the trust required to build the future of e-government.
And that brings us directly back to you. We've spent an hour talking about the intricacies of the Uruguayan system, but this is not just a Uruguayan problem. Think about your own digital identity. Think about the apps on your phone, the portals you use to pay your taxes, the digital signatures you use to finalize documents for work.
Yeah, how much trust do you place in the systems that hold your most sensitive data?
And more importantly, how do the massive institutions behind those systems communicate with you when they are under fire? Do they default to immediate transparency, or do they default to PR spin and silence?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical question we face as we move deeper into the digital age. If our digital identities, our ability to sign contracts, access our bank accounts, and fundamentally prove that we exist in the modern world are entirely dependent on centralized institutions.
Right.
And those institutions default to silence and secrecy to protect their own reputations. Do we actually own our digital identities at all? Or are we just renting them from a system that won't even tell us when the locks have been changed?
That is a thought that should keep all of us awake tonight. You can't hear the lock click in the digital world, so you have to demand that the people holding the keys tell you when the door is broken. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, demand transparency, and we will see you next time.